For over 1,000 years, the galaxy was governed by a democratic union of planets, known collectively as the Republic. A union founded on high-minded rhetoric and a spirit of cooperation. Their millennia-long reign inspired an era of peace. Yet this peace bred complacency and a growing sense of self-interest. Many worlds grew disillusioned, watching as the core grew rich and fat on the resources mined in the frontier. Continually, these worlds sent their elected representatives to Coruscant, only to see them trade away their votes for personal enrichment, to utilize the mechanisms of the state to control their people, to sell their worlds bit by bit, bleeding them dry, betraying not only their campaign promises, but also the very interest of their people, leaving them open to repeated attacks from pirates or slavers, all the while they sat in the safety and comfort of Coruscant. The proverbial straw that would break the Eopie's back came when a new round of taxes were implemented. Taxes that disproportionately hurt the frontier worlds, the Outer Rim, and the great mercantile interests. In protest, the Trade Federation would occupy the world of Naboo, and this crisis highlighted for all to see the inefficiencies of the Republic. Its failures to respond or resolve it the direct result of a Byzantine bureaucracy, centuries of compounding legal precedents, and widespread corruption. To those that suffered, it was clear. Reform was impossible, the Republic was irreparably broken, the only option left was to start over. So entered Count Dooku of Sereno, a former Jedi who had grown disillusioned with both his former order and the Republic as a whole, who, while on the planet Raxus, commandeered a local holonet relay. There he broadcast his scathing indictments, lambasting the Republic and putting into words the feelings of trillions. His words, finding receptive minds across the galaxy, spurred political activism, and on countless worlds that had long been loyal members of the Republic, a discussion began about the value of such membership. Across the galaxy, a litany of condemnations were put forward. The corruption, the distant and dispassionate reign, and the policies that favored particular worlds. For the first time in a millennium, secession, separatism were not only openly discussed, they were openly considered viable options. Across the galaxy, a loose association of secessionist groups banded together, appointing Count Dooku as the group's head. As more worlds joined this movement, formal structures were established, and together they adopted a new name, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Thousands of systems flocked to this new confederation, looking for a chance, for a future for their world. And what did the Republic do? Did they take this as a chance to evaluate their systems, their failings? No, of course not. They passed laws prohibiting members of the galactic government from talking or otherwise communicating with those within this separatist movement, not wanting to give any semblance of legitimacy to this illegal assemblage. And for many, their actions served as further proof of the irreparability of the Republic. In a relatively short amount of time, this movement crafted a new government. At its head stood an executive office held by Count Dooku, one which was soon granted additional powers to resolve this crisis with the Republic. His position was supported by a Senate convened on Raxus, its members no longer constrained by the leviathan of red tape, each representing the interest of their own worlds and working at least in name for the common good, with most members being true believers, promoting the principles of democracy, common defense, and reining in the corporate interest. Despite these public sentiments, above the Senate sat the Executive Separatist Council, a cabal of corporate powers personally recruited by Dooku into the Confederate movement. Leaders in technology, finance, and trade, the intergalactic banking clan, the Techno Union, the Commerce Guild, and of course the Trade Federation. Each was drawn in with the promise of greater profits and power within this young government. Together, they would maintain a considerable and often covert influence across the Confederacy, and more directly within its military. Each of these corporations provided the newly emerging state with access to and command over their private armies. And while the Republic debated the creation of its own military, these private forces were bolstered as factories on Geonosis, Hypori, and elsewhere pumped out innumerable quantities of droids. These droids made up the bulk of the Confederate military, supplemented by organic leadership, special forces, and planetary defense forces. These newly made droids were soon put to the test, as 3 agents of the Republic were captured and tried on Geonosis. During their sentencing, the Republic attacked, first with their traditional enforcers, the Jedi, but soon with an army of clones bred in secret, beginning a war that would engulf the galaxy. With the outbreak of hostilities, worlds were forced to take sides, many openly declaring their support for the Confederacy, mobilizing their people and their economies for war. The Confederate military rushed into action, their armies built around autonomous and semi-autonomous armored vehicles, supported by overwhelming quantities of droids. Their navy began the conflict with little more than a mercantile fleet, its earliest vessels refitted freighters, crewed by droids and protected by swarms of autonomous fighters. These forces were supported by indigenous units, motivated to protect their homes or to free them from under the boot of Republic oppression. Their first objective was to secure their control over all star lanes into the Rim and to win the support of additional systems to their cause, securing for themselves their core territories, fracturing the Republic, and breaking its capacity to effectively wage war. As a result, fighting spread across multiple fronts. Christophsis, Ryloth, Felucia, Dantooine, Malastare, and many others became battlegrounds. And with early efforts to field advanced weapons, such as the Malevolence, and reports of another that was said to feed upon the living force, these initial battles largely favored the Confederacy, ultimately culminating in a daring invasion of Kamino, the source of the Republic's clone armies. Their defeat in that battle, and their failure to secure the hyper routes into the Rim, saw the war devolve into a quasi-stalemate, with both sides claiming victories and suffering losses, trading ships, lives, and planets, with no end to the conflict in sight. Things became fractious within the Confederacy, as some voices called for peace. Others believed their only chance for peace was in defeating the Republic, and some wondered if they were in fact any better off within the Confederacy. Such thoughts of peace were quickly lost to bombings, assassinations, and a firestorm of accusations between Republic and Confederate officials. Worse still, as the war dragged on, the immense material and industrial might of the Republic was brought to bear. Slowly, the Confederate military gave ground, and the Executive Council was forced to remain mobile, denying the Republic a major target. Across the galaxy, the Confederate military dug in, and where the Republic pursued them, they were met with heavy emplacements, fortifications, and fleets of new, purpose-built warships. The battles grew long and bloody, and the war bogged down into a series of endless sieges. In a move to bring the war to a favorable conclusion, a fleet was assembled in secret and unleashed upon Coruscant. Republic citizens awoke to find a once distant war on their doorstep. Droids battling clone across kilometer-tall skyscrapers, the space around the planet enveloped in war. Yet, for all it was little more than a distraction. The real target was Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine. And though their forces successfully secured the Chancellor, they found themselves assailed on all sides. Their plans of holding him and forcing the Republic into negotiations came to nothing, as shortly after his abduction, a pair of Jedi liberated him from his captivity, in the process killing Count Dooku. This proved a disastrous setback for the Confederacy, with General Grievous, the supreme commander of Confederate forces, effectively becoming the new head of state. Lacking the political acumen or charisma of Dooku, faith in victory faltered. In an attempt to restore such hopes, a desperate offensive was launched across a number of star systems, even as the Confederacy's capacity to wage war collapsed. Republic intelligence forces hunted the general, believing his death or capture would bring about the end of the war. And when they discovered his position, they struck hard and fast. And though he attempted to escape, he would perish in the fighting. With the loss of its predominant political and military leadership, control of the Confederacy fell to the increasingly irrelevant Executive Council. They were powerless as an institution, merely watching as the galaxy was remade, their remaining armies collapsing under repeated assaults, and their enemy transformed, the Republic replaced with an empire. This council, in its last moments recognizing they had been nothing more than pawns to another's plans, as a figure known to history as Darth Vader brought the final blow to the Confederacy, personally executing this council and issuing a signal ordering that all battle droids across the galaxy shut down. In mere moments, the war was effectively over. Clone troopers occupied many worlds unopposed, and in the galactic reorganization, the corporate powers that had been the financial backbone of the Confederacy were nationalized. Their assets, factories, and worlds placed under the Imperial military's control. Their droid armies were melted down, though some would be scavenged by less savory individuals and organizations. Their fleets were stripped of parts, disabled, and haphazardly disposed of. Despite all of this, Some continued to fight, refusing to be absorbed. They resisted for decades. One by one, these rump states were crushed, and surviving resistance grew smaller and smaller. In the end, they were either eradicated, cast into the dustbins of history, or joined with a newfound movement, the Rebel Alliance. It was their resistance and the chaos of the Clone Wars more broadly that were utilized by this new empire to legitimize their heavy-handed and often harsh rule. They played upon the fact that the Confederate leadership was disproportionately non-human to pursue racial policies, most prominently through the promotion of high human culture. And though for many, the Confederacy was remembered for war, for death, for the rise of the Empire and their world-killing weapons, there are those who still hold to the ideals that the Confederacy inspired, to the words that Count Dooku had espoused. This legacy endured the reign of the Empire. Perhaps that is why, as the Empire fractured and burned, the New Republic bore witness to the rise of a new separatist union.